All right, you guys, happy Wednesday. And this week, I offer you something different. We have the Lindsay Clancy trial, we have a nurse, and an investigation we've all felt a part of. And I really wanted to speak on parts of this topic that I think everybody's missing. If your immediate instinct is to assign blame to Lindsay, Patrick, or the healthcare system, I think you're missing the point entirely. I'm asking a different question today. Why have we reduced a complex, devastating trial to a much more simple matter of binary choice, choosing sides between the two? Those are immediate answers, comfortable ones even, and yet we haven't even agreed on the fundamental question being asked. You are demanding an answer before even defining what an answer is. Look how fast the internet has created its own reality. People are flooding with TikTok comments, YouTube comments claiming Lindsay never admitted to it, that she couldn't talk because of a crushed thyroid, and that her doctors coached her to fake hearing voices. But if you step out of the comment section and into the actual courtroom, the illusion breaks, so they won't do it. Her own lawyers openly admit she did it. The crushed thyroid didn't stop her from speaking to her husband days later on a hospital speakerphone. And the coaching rumor, it was an unproven theory thrown out by the state that the psychologist fiercely denied under oath. Now, we are watching people invent a completely fake trial online just to avoid facing the reality of the real one. So before you tell me who to believe, tell me what you actually know, and it better be more than you don't. But let's step into the deepest, darkest what ifs of this tragedy. What if the truth isn't about an affair or negligence or a secret plot? What if Patrick Clancy is taking all of this public heat, all of this online hatred entirely on purpose? What if he, his mother, and his family are actively working behind the scenes with the defense to help her build reasonable doubt? Think about it. There was no affair. There was just a man left with absolutely nothing as well, who still deeply loves the woman he married. What if they sat in that hospital room and talked about eventually him moving on, and she gave him her blessing? What if his public forgiveness wasn't suspicious? What if it was calculated? What if that's true? It means Patrick is enduring the ultimate sacrifice, letting the entire world think he's a monster just to protect the shattered soul of the woman he loved. Most of us live under a comforting illusion that if you're a good person, if you love your family and ask for help when you are sick, you will be safe. The Lindsay Clancy case completely shatters that belief. But the darkest irony isn't just what happened in that house, it's what is happening to all of us watching it. This trial has become a psychological contagion that the scariest part becomes watching how easily it's caused people consuming it to lose control of their minds too. And it makes you wonder if a healthy person can lose grip on reality just by association, just by watching this nightmare from a distance, even through a screen. How effortlessly did the human mind break when it was happening to her in reality? No one can look at execution and postpartum psychosis of this level and argue why it would be humane. But let's be honest about the alternative. Is forcing a shattered mind to sit in a locked concrete box for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years any better? Any more merciful? We debate the death penalty versus life in prison as if one is a punishment and the other is an act of kindness. But having your life taken from you day by day forever might just be the most inhumane outcome of all, which is warranted for some. But for her, I ask, would she want to be with her children in another part of life that doesn't do a disservice to her anymore? I don't believe in options for cold-blooded killers. I do believe in an exception to the rule in a case as badly handled as this. Welcome back to the nursing investigation. The prosecution and the defense don't necessarily enter the public story from the same starting point. Before the defense ever called its first witness, the Commonwealth had spent roughly 3 weeks and nearly 70 witnesses constructing its account of what happened. Today, August 17th, it rested. And then the defense began presenting its affirmative case. Think about that psychologically. For weeks, the jury has heard Commonwealth witness, Commonwealth witness, Commonwealth witness. Yes, the defense gets to cross-examine those witnesses, which is extremely important. And the presumption of innocence remains. But for the public watching clips and headlines, something else can happen. The allegation starts feeling like a baseline reality, and the defense starts feeling it like I feel like the defense starts feeling as if they have to explain their way out of it. So I feel like it's legally backwards. Lindsay doesn't have to prove herself insane. The Commonwealth most certainly has to prove its case, though. For 3 weeks, we've watched prosecutors reconstruct one of the most incomprehensible nights imaginable. Dozens of witnesses, medical records, Google searches, cell phones, doctors, experts, video, family, Patrick, so many things. And today, the prosecution rested, which means after all that, they've said, this is our case. This is what we believe the evidence proves. But tomorrow, another group of lawyers can stand in the exact same courtroom in front of the exact same jury, looking at many of the exact same facts and tell an entirely different story. So I ask you, which one is real? That's a question I never would have asked before I ended up in court myself, because I used to think court was where you went to find out what actually happened. And come to find out, it's not that quite simple. A courtroom wasn't there when it happened. A courtroom reconstructs what happened. And there are rules governing this reconstruction, what can be shown, what can't, what a jury can hear and what they can't, what an expert can conclude, what 12 strangers what 12 strangers are ultimately allowed to consider. Meanwhile, you and I may know things the jury doesn't, and the jury may never hear the things we've never seen. And somehow at the end of it all, we're going to get one word: guilty or not guilty. But will we know what finally happened? Or will we only know what could be proven? Because those aren't necessarily the same question. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because I haven't told you what to believe. I've just taken away your confidence that you even know what question you're supposed to be answering. Welcome to the US courtroom. I used to think court was where you went to find out the truth. Somebody figured out who was lying, and eventually you got the answer. Being involved in litigation changed that for me. I've watched things that happened specifically in my own life that got reduced to sentences and briefs. I've watched the other side take facts I recognize and arrange them into a version of me I don't even recognize. And yes, I believe my attorneys are presenting the fuller and more accurate reality. But that's exactly what made something click for me. It's a reconstruction by a machine. Not Lindsay is innocent, not Lindsay is guilty, not Patrick is lying, not the doctors killed those children. I think we're investigating a machine we're relying upon to decide those possibilities and asking what a version can actually tell us about the reality. For weeks, I've watched everyone argue about who you're supposed to believe, Patrick or Lindsay, prosecution or defense, the doctors or the family. And I realized I'm watching the trial differently because I've experienced litigation myself. Maybe the question isn't simply who do we believe? Maybe we need to understand what a courtroom is actually asking us to do, because a courtroom doesn't take us back to January 24th. It reconstructs January 24th. And when the most important evidence may be what was happening inside another human being's mind, how can anyone even reconstruct that? The courtroom isn't reconstructing reality from everything that exists. It's reconstructing the reality of what the law permits the fact finder to consider. So why would a court intentionally hide information from a jury? Because the legal system starts with an uncomfortable assumption. More information does not necessarily produce a more accurate decision, and I've had to learn this the hard way myself. And this is something that I want to tell the world, every piece of information when I can't, and that's really hard. I burst into tears. I become too reserved or too silent, even. I can become so overwhelmed and so tired, I want to pass out, but I can't stop thinking. So that's why you hear objection, sustained, the jury will disregard that, motions to dismiss, and other long lasting conversations, because jurors aren't supposed to be exposed to inadmissible evidence. That can mean sidebar hearings while the jury is absent, pretrial motions, or rulings made before trial. And theoretically, it's supposed to protect fairness of both sides. But here's the paradox I feel like I'm picking up on. The protections create another underlying problem. The jury doesn't necessarily receive everything that happened. It receives the portion of what happened that survives the legal process for admission. And we, the public, may receive something very different again. We may be receiving too much information. Think of it as three versions, like I do. There's the reality, everything that actually happened in real time, every conversation, thought, symptom, interaction, everything Lindsay experienced, or Patrick even, things nobody even documented, things nobody can remember correctly. The evidentiary record then comes into play. What can actually be proven, authenticated, and admitted under the applicable rules? There's the public story, what gets reported, televised, clipped, tweeted, summarized on TikTok, discussed on Reddit, or selected by creators to make long form YouTube videos. Those are not necessarily identical things. And there's another weird layer. Sometimes the public can know something the jury can't even consider, even if they did know it. Suppose something gets discussed in reporting or appears in a public filing, but is ruled inadmissible at trial. So that's where you hear things again like guilty in the court of public opinion. This was one of the strangest things for me to understand when I became involved in litigation myself. I kept thinking, but that's what happened. How can this not matter? I'm telling the truth. And eventually I realized these are all different questions, and I can establish it in the way the court allows it to be established. Those aren't necessarily always the same question. And that's where I think a lot of people lose before they even step foot in a courtroom. If something happened but isn't admissible, does that make the court's reconstruction less true or more fair? The US uses an adversarial system. The parties and their lawyers gather evidence, present their prospective cases, challenge each other's evidence, cross examine witnesses, and expose weaknesses. A neutral judge or jury then determines the facts under the rules of evidence and law. The theory behind the system is that the clash between the two adversaries is more likely to expose the truth than allowing one side to dictate the narrative. But here's an unavoidable human error and problem. Evidence doesn't interpret itself. A Google search is a fact. Why someone searched it is an interpretation. A psychiatric note is a fact. What it tells us about Lindsay's mental state days later is an interpretation. Something Patrick remembers, but Lindsay is saying may become evidence if admitted at all. What Lindsay meant, but it still can be disputed. A medication was prescribed. That's a fact. Whether the medication contributed to her condition is an entirely different proposition requiring evidence. That's why both sides sometimes accurately point to the same evidence and argue radically different things. Before becoming involved in litigation myself, I thought court was where you went to find out what happened. Now I understand it differently. Court is where we take what happened and try to reconstruct it using evidence. And I know some people will say, well, isn't that the same thing? I think necessarily, no, not at all. Because I've watched facts from my own life appear in legal documents and barely recognize the person those facts were being used to describe. The other side can say, Clarissa failed the exit exam and now she wants a nursing diploma years later. And technically, the facts inside that sentence are true. But my side says it like this: she completed the nursing curriculum and disputed the examination was a separate comprehensive predictor that became a barrier between her and completion of licensure, as well as the time delay the opposing party contributed to creating this long delay, not by Price's own doing. I'm obviously going to tell you to believe the second version because I truly, truly, deep down, think it is the closest version to reflecting what actually happened. But that's exactly my point. The court wasn't sitting beside me in nursing school. The judge didn't live those years. The chancellor of Jersey College wasn't there. The lawyer wasn't even there. The court receives evidence, arguments of law, and has to reconstruct what happened from there when they weren't even there. I did. I saw it. Nobody else did the way I did, the way I was the one who experienced it all. So I know what happened. But that's not the case for every lawsuit. People lie. People use their Fifth Amendment. They don't take the stand. Sometimes both sides are even guilty. When it comes to Patrick versus Lindsay, I think it's the wrong question. People online become Team Patrick, Team Lindsay, believe the prosecution, believe the defense, but the jury's job isn't supposed to be picking which person they like or believe in wholesale. It's evaluating evidence against the legal questions they've been instructed to decide. And Lindsay's case presents an extraordinarily different version of that problem because in Massachusetts specifically, criminal responsibility standard asks her about her mental capacity at the time of the killings. Once lack of criminal responsibility is properly an issue, Lindsay doesn't carry the burden of proving it. The Commonwealth must prove criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. A verdict answers that legal question, but it doesn't necessarily answer every human question. And I think that's where the justice system falls short. But coincidentally, that's not necessarily a failure of the court. It's a limitation of what the court was built to accomplish way back when. I've watched this happen in my own life. If you read one side of my nursing school case, you could walk away believing I'm simply a student who repeatedly failed an exam and years later decided I deserved something out of thin air. And if that's all you knew about me, I understand why you would believe it. But then my attorneys take those same events and add what we believe is missing to that context: what the exam was, whether it was part of the curriculum, what caused the delay in time, what I completed, and what exactly prevented me from reaching that licensing process, what happened afterwards. So suddenly, you may be looking at a completely different story. The past didn't change, the presentation of the past did. I can repeat my experience until I'm blue in the face, but it's up to interpretation what you actually believe, what can be proven. There's fact versus interpretation, and that's what a lot of this boils down to. For example, if a particular search, statement, behavior, or medical record is admitted, there's what happened and there's what the record says, what can be proven. Then there's the prosecution. This means. Then there's defense. This means. Then what can the jury or we watching actually conclude from this? Sometimes the answer will be something. Sometimes it can genuinely be we can't know. When you're thinking about the evidence presented, I want you to ask yourself, what would that information reasonably have meant to somebody before January 24th, 2023, the day it all happened? What actually happened? The historical truth. Nobody can possess all of it. Lindsay, Patrick, prosecution, defense, the medical teams, nobody. What can be proven in court? The evidentiary truth, controlled by relevance, admissibility, constitutional protections, burdens of proof, witnesses, experts, objections, and judicial rulings. It's in this confine of what the judicial system allows. What does the verdict legally establish? Just a legal conclusion. In Lindsay's case, the jury isn't being asked to explain every dimension of January 24th. They're being asked to answer a particular legal question under Massachusetts law. And then there's almost a fourth truth. What does the public believe happened? Which may be based on an entirely different collection of information, like Patrick, for example. There is absolutely no evidence that Patrick Clancy was involved in these murders, was complicit in them, or was ever unfaithful, or did anything to lead to them. There's a need for a psychological, aka a logical motive. The human brain is wired to understand cause and effect. There's the social media exploitation and rage bait of it all. The true crime content creators on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, etc. make money based on views, clicks, and engagement. This is manufactured drama, rage bait, and the algorithm will feed you more of it until you believe it. Some online critics blame Patrick simply because he left the house that evening. They argue that because Lindsay was struggling with severe anxiety and depression, he should have never left her alone with the children ever. However, the trial evidence proved that Patrick was actively following the advice of medical professionals who recommended that Lindsay gradually spend small increments of time alone to regain her confidence and transition back to normalcy. So, if none of this ever happened, what would those series of events mean? Probably nothing. No one ever thinks they're going to end up on true crime when they walk out of their front door. There's also distrust in the prosecution that is added to these theories. The way they've handled this case has been questionable on a moral level. One day, I'm like, okay, the children deserve somebody to fight for them. Even if it's against their mother, as disheartening as it is, the children still deserve a voice in this. Even if, I don't know, as sad as it is, even if she didn't mean it, somebody has to speak for them. Are they going about it the right way? Not always, but they deserve to be there for them. So that is where I come in, I think, as a creator, because I'm now reconstructing the reconstruction of it all. And I think that gives me an ethical responsibility that could become part of this whole video that other people aren't doing. The jury has rules about what they're allowed to consider. I think I do too. And when it comes to just having a personal opinion, being human, not a creator of any means, we don't have rules. You don't have rules, which means we actually have to be even more careful, I think, not less. Because now I don't think I'm another creator declaring, I solved the Lindsay Clancy case. I think I'm showing you why solving it from our couches may be impossible. And ultimately, maybe a verdict will tell us that the Commonwealth legally proved it. Maybe it will tell us that 12 jurors concluded from the evidence they were permitted to consider. But that doesn't necessarily mean January 24th will finally make sense. A verdict can end a trial without ending the question we all have. So before you judge me for asking why execution isn't on the table for Lindsay Clancy's case specifically, understand that we are debating the death penalty and life in prison as if one is a punishment and the other is a mercy. But let's be honest about what we're actually arguing. Is it a swift execution really more inhumane than forcing a broken mind to sit in a concrete box for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? For many, the true torture isn't losing your life all at once. It's having it taken from you day by day forever until there's nothing left. And if I asked any mother who's been through this, their answer is probably what? They would do it. They would take the execution. They would go be with their children. And if they didn't want to, if they felt more at peace paying for their actions by sitting in that concrete box, I would respect that too. But in a situation like this, I think there should be another choice. Because I ask myself, what would justice even look like here? I don't know. Prison doesn't make sense to me emotionally. A psychiatric hospital doesn't somehow make this tragedy feel resolved either. Lindsay is paralyzed. Her 3 children are dead. The family she had is gone. Everybody around her that was in her life is broken. Whatever happens legally, she will still wake up inside the consequences of January 24th for the rest of her life. That's not me saying there shouldn't be any legal consequences. It's me saying I don't know that there is an outcome readily available today in the justice system that could ever feel proportional to what was lost. For her and the way this was handled, even, I think it's more compassionate to put someone like this out of their suffering if they wanted it. So we argue death by installment, meaning spending decades behind bars, essentially the rest of their quality of life, is structurally more torturous than a swift death penalty to me. So what happens next is final. If she's found guilty, she will go to state prison for the rest of her life without parole. She can appeal the verdict, but she cannot change her story. She said she did it, and she did it, and that is what it is. If found not guilty by reason of insanity, that doesn't mean she didn't do it. She's just asking not to be legally responsible for it. She will still be committed to a strict, secure state psychiatric facility. She would remain there until a judge rules she is no longer a danger to herself or society, which often takes decades or lasts the rest of a person's life. So, no, I don't think everyone who murders should have options. But in a case like this, I believe she should. And at the very least, give what remains of her life to understanding what happened, just as her children ultimately gave something to themselves to science. If this tragedy can leave us anything, let it be answers, because somewhere inside this tragedy are questions that could protect another mother, another family, another child. And no, it's not that a victim owes the world anything, but unfortunately, that's the harsh reality of how the world evolves and becomes better over time. And there's no way to take back the past and make this right. What's done is done, and that's the harsh reality. There are going to be people who leave this believing Lindsay Clancy was responsible. There are people who will believe she was profoundly ill. People will debate Patrick, her doctors, her medications, the hospitals, the prosecution, the defense, the investigation of all of this. But there are 3 things in this case that aren't arguments: Cora, Dawson, and Callan. So I'll leave you with that today, and I'll see you guys next week.